Well, I have a sort of suggestion, and that is this, that before we decide either to save the planet or to destroy it, we pause for a moment of silence. I don't mean that kind of grim silence which one observes when somebody says, such and such a famous person has just died, and we'll observe a moment of silence in his honor. And everybody frowns and thinks very serious thoughts. That's not silence at all. I mean real silence, in which we stop thinking and experience reality as reality is. Because after all, if I talk all the time, I can't hear what anyone else has to say. And if I think all the time, and by that I mean specifically talking to yourself subvocally inside your skull, if I think all the time, I have nothing to think about except thoughts. And so I'm never in touch with the real world. Now, what is the real world? Some people have the theory that the real world is material or physical. I say it's made of kind of a stuff. Other people have the theory that the real world is spiritual or mental. But I want you to point out that both those theories of the world are concepts. They're constructions of words. And the real world is not an idea. It is not words. Reality is you'll find, therefore, that if you get with reality, all sorts of illusions disappear. And I will mention several illusions that have not this kind of existence. Let's begin with some very down-to-earth ones, like money. Money is a very useful method of accounting. It is a measure of wealth in the same way as inches are measures of length and grams measures of weight. You cannot eat money. You could have a fantastic quantity of dollar bills and stock certificates on a desert island, and they would be useless to you. What you would need would be food and animals and companions. Money simply represents wealth in rather the same way that the menu represents the dinner. Only we are psychologically perverted in such a way that some of us would rather have money than real wealth. But you know, you cannot drive in 5 cars at once, even though they be Cadillacs. You cannot live simultaneously in 6 houses, or eat 12 roasts of beef at one meal. There is a limit to what one can consume. So that's one of the sort of confusions I'm talking about. Another is that we confuse ourselves as living organisms with our idea of ourselves. That is to say, with a conception of myself which is called the personality or ego. That is what we have been told we are. And it's an extremely crude and limited conception of oneself. of the actual unique living organism. And we get unhappy because we're thinking of ourselves in this way, because we think, well, gee, I'm going to die. I once talked to a woman who came to me and said she was afraid of death. And we went into it in a long conversation. I said, what are you really afraid of? And she thought it over, and he said, you know, what I'm going to be afraid of is what other people are going to say. They're going to say, poor old Gert, she couldn't last it through. Because you see, who you think you are is entirely dependent on who people have told you you are. You're not that. Then another thing that bothers us is time. Most people nowadays say, I have no time. Of course you don't. Because you are not aware of the present. You know, the present is represented on your watch by a hairline that is as thin as possible, as is consistent with visibility. And so everybody thinks the present is, instead of, now, the present is the only real time. There is no past, and there isn't a future. And there never will be. We think ordinarily of the present as an infinitesimal point at which the future changes into the past. And we also do a terrible thing. We imagine ourselves to be results of the past. And we're always passing the buck over our shoulders, like when God approached Adam in the Garden of Eden and said, hast thou eaten of the fruit of the tree whereof I told thee thou shouldst not eat? And Adam said, this woman thou gavest me, she tempted me, and I did eat. And God looked at Eve and said, hast thou eaten of the fruit of the tree whereof I told thee thou shouldst not eat? And she said, the serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. And God, out of the corner of his eye, looked at the serpent. The serpent said nothing. So you see, we're always passing the buck. And don't realize that the past is caused by the present, as the wake of a ship flows back from the prow. Now, the wake doesn't drive the ship any more than the tail wags the dog. But we've all got excuses. Well, my mother had a fit while she was carrying me. They didn't bring me up right. And then they go to the mother and say, how is it that you could have been so irresponsible with your children? And she says, well, it was my parents who didn't bring me up right either. And so everybody passes the buck. But the truth of the matter is, it all begins here. This is where the creation begins. And you're doing it and won't admit it. Because, of course, you're all God in disguise. Jesus found that out, and they crucified him for saying so. So this is a very odd thing for Westerners to understand, and particularly for Americans. Because we are so fixated on the future. When we say we want to put something down, we say it has no future. Well, do you? Much better to have a present. Because if you don't, it's useless to make plans. Because when they work out, you won't be there to enjoy them. You'll be thinking of something else. So we realize that we are living out of now and throwing the past behind us.
He said that in the very beginning there was nothing in the universe but peace, that this peace reached everywhere, and every one was in peace with everyone else. And they talked to God, and God answered them in the voice of a small child, a very gentle child, not much older than themselves, because he was speaking to common people and not to great scholars. And they were all peaceful until along came Lucifer. And Lucifer was self-will, and by self-will fell the angels. And when Lucifer asked deity for certain privileges, he was a faithful cherub at that time, God spoke again in the voice of the little child and said what was necessary. And Lucifer said, "Oh no, I don't like this. I don't want to live in a universe that is ruled by a small child. And if the deity can't speak out the great and glorious words I want to hear, I'm going to take over the job." Remember, this is in Low Dutch in Germany. So he said, "I'm going to take over. I'm going to run the universe now." So he challenged deity. He said, "I'm not going to do these things. If you're just a puny little deity living in a space without anything around you except a baby voice, I'm going to show you how to run this thing." And at the moment that he said that was the moment of the great disobedience. And in an instant, the heavens completely changed. Everything changed. The sky was filled with great spiritual powers. In the midst of them was seated or placed the ineffable deity, with all power, all splendor, all skills, and a thunder and rumbling voice that could be heard everywhere. And it is thus that the pride of Lucifer opened the abyss of the self, opened the world of sorrow and pain, because he had tried to take over the management of the universe, and because he could see no God until he disobeyed, and then the whole glory of heaven broke upon him. Now there's something about this, it's almost a beautiful myth or legend that can be carried right on down. For the man taking over the universe because God didn't seem big enough to handle the job is something that we all might think about occasionally. Also in all the problems that we have. When we think of the universal divine plan as too weak to handle us, to take care of our problems, so that we have to suddenly become helpers in this deal, we may get into serious trouble. But Bamey was essentially a great mystic, and he pointed out that when the human being becomes aware of the realities and uses them properly, the great grief or the great sorrow fades away again, and man and God live together in infinite community, always man obeying that which was eternally ordained to be obeyed. So in this way, Bamey had his statement of silence, of peace, that was disrupted by the rise of human faults, human emergencies, and the forever human optimism and complacency. So that to be still is to know the universe as stillness. To be still is to hear the voice of God and the voice of a small child. To disobey is to bring down upon oneself the thunder of an absolutely immutable power. To obey, we do not know there are laws. When we break them, we discover to our sorrow that we have not been very wise. So we're going to try to think in terms of a quietude that is free from ulterior motive. And this was what Zen attempted to do in India. And this is what Taoism attempted to do in China. This also is the mystery of Neoplatonism and the ideals of Pythagoras. It was the idea that man only comes into trouble when he does it wrong. As long as he is right, he doesn't know there are any laws, because by keeping them perfectly, everything is serene and well balanced. But the moment self-interest takes over, the power of the abyss is loosened upon us.